I am Stephen Henry Madoff and the chair of the MA Curatorial Practice Program at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. And today, as we do on every Wednesday, we have the Curatorial Roundtable, in which I invite distinguished curators and institutional directors to talk about works that have been important to them and to their communities. And today I'm excited to have Laura Zarta, who is coming to us from Bogota. And I'm just going to read a brief bio that Laura has shared with me, which says, since 2018, Laura Zarta has served as Chief Curator of the Arts and Other Collections Unit of the Banco de la República, the Central Bank of Colombia, which holds several museums and cultural centers throughout the country, much like the Smithsonian, for example, in the United States, where she's responsible for planning and executing the programming of temporary exhibitions nationwide, the research and development of the art collection, the leadership of the curatorial team, and the coordination of special exhibition projects, such as the exhibition Traces of Disappearance, the cases of Uraba, and Nukak territory, which was organized along with the Commission of the Clarification of Truth, Coexistence, and Non-Repetition, and Forensic Architecture at the Miguel Urratia Art Museum. Also, since 2008, Laura has been working as the founding director of the Global Warning Agency, a foundation with 15 years of operations in Colombia that's committed to the sustainable and creative development of the country, focusing its efforts on climate action and working with grassroots communities. At the same time, Laura has worked as a teacher at EAN University, Jorge Tadeo Lozano University, and the Los Andes University. As an independent curator, she's developed various exhibitions, such as the 45th National Salon of Arts, with research creation projects related to nature, making visible contemporary artistic practices related, again, to sustainability. She also co-curated It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's the Yes Men in New York. Laura has participated as a panelist and guest speaker at international events such as the World Economic Forum on Latin America, the World Assembly of Civicus, Global Power Shift, TEDx Youth, the International Symposium of Museums, and the annual meeting of NGOs at the United Nations headquarters. So in welcoming Laura, I want to say that Laura is going to speak for about 50 minutes or so. And then if you have questions for Laura, please put them at the bottom of your screen in the Q&A, and we'll answer them. At the end of the questions, the webinar will be over. So I am delighted to welcome Laura.
Well, thank you very, very much, Stephen, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm very happy to share with you some of my work. And as Stephen noted in his invitation, this is meant to be like a relaxed conversation, not like a formal lecture. So I will discuss with you 3 exhibitions or projects in terms of content and execution and some of the behind the scenes stories. And I will share with you why these particular projects have been especially meaningful to me, and hopefully we'll get to share some of the challenges also and different approaches to the curatorial work that each of these projects entail. And hopefully some of these experiences will be helpful for you and the curatorial projects that you have been developing. So I'll be sharing them, and hopefully by the end, after around 40 minutes, the narrative of how they connect amongst each other becomes clearer as I share them, since they entail different curatorial approaches, themes, challenges, types of institutions where I worked with and other colleagues. So yesterday, Stephen and I had this brief talk, and he was asking me like, how did it all start? So I want to give you a little bit more context on myself and my practice. I consider myself an arts and climate organizer, and generally speaking, I'm a curator and I'm a cultural manager as well. I've had a great passion for creating meaningful and engaging experiences for diverse audiences while building bridges between sustainability and creativity. That's something that has moved me since a very young age. And I have been especially passionate about projects that consciously address issues related with arts and politics. Especially today, we will be focusing on 3 projects that entail ecology and human and environmental rights that I very much love. And also, while we were speaking yesterday, Stephen, about how it all started. Well, I have an MA in art business with concentrations in museum and nonprofits management, as well as curatorial studies from Sotheby's Institute of Art in New York. But also I have 2 bachelor degrees, one in fine arts and another one on cultural projects from Los Andes University. So of course, you know what fine arts, studying a BA in fine arts entails. But the other side, the cultural project side, I had classes that related to art writing, to art criticism, to curatorial studies, curatorial practice, and it was since the beginning in the undergraduate programs that I became very much interested in working with other people to create projects that were open to wider audiences. So I sort of moved my creative practice from producing artworks into producing projects and exhibitions that related to specific communities and audiences. And also to talk a little bit about GWA and the foundation, which I think is something that is another like big pillar of those early years of my work. What we do mainly is believing that sustainability requires creative interdisciplinary thinking and interdisciplinary actions, right? And that artistic creations are not autonomous, that they're linked to social context where they originate, and that institutions, let's say foundations, museums, states, governments, etc., are not neutral places, but rather produce symbolic and economic and cultural values. And so in GWA, we work in education, research, and creation with grassroots communities at national and international levels, with different allies, activists, educational entities, and some social businesses or enterprises as well around topics like mitigation and adaptation to climate change, conservation, natural resources management, and ecosystems, making use of creative tools from the visual arts, from performing arts to design, from design to architecture, to move that conversation on sustainability and climate action from the intellectual understanding of a very specific set of people to the emotional and creative engagement of more people here, especially nationwide. In these years of almost 15 years of work, we have reached more or less 18,000 people directly, benefiting more than 25,000 people in their communities, and we have connected with close to 30,000 people through online projects that we've developed with other partners. So in general terms, what that means is that we're a group of young people, professionals and volunteers who believe in the power of culture to generate those social and environmental changes, and who are betting on sustainability. So that passion for the creative practices and those like curatorial projects that you were mentioning, of those contemporary art exhibitions or projects that I've organized here in Colombia or abroad, and those also those other projects that we were developing based in climate action through GWA work and some volunteer work, allowed us to win different recognitions and to participate in different projects and become part of international networks like the Global Changemakers in 2008, the Climate Champions, and One Young World as a One Young World ambassador in 2011, and participating as guest speaker in different international events, some from the art world and some from the, let's say, more activism and environmental work, like the World Economic Forum on Latin America, the Civicus Youth and World Assemblies, Global Power Shift, TEDx Youth, the International Symposium of Museums, and the annual meeting of NGOs at the United Nations headquarters in the US. So I think that's sort of a brief but executive context, so that you get to know me a little bit more, and hopefully that sort of informs a little bit more what's behind these exhibitions and what are the motivations behind them that I will share with you. So let me just share my screen. Maybe something else that I think it's important as part of the context is that, and probably you saw that in some of the PDFs that I sent beforehand, is that the nature of contemporary exhibition practice, I think, requires some rethinking about those traditional notions of individual curatorial work in order to hopefully replace them with more open and dynamic models that understand the curatorial as a network, and curation as one of the numerous modes or ways and contextual factors that can help to produce the creation of meaning in exhibitions. So I'm not really interested that much in the notion of the curator as a self-sufficient prodigy or an autonomous only author of an exhibition project, which has been widely controversial since the 1990s. Instead, I like approaching the curatorial or curating as a interdisciplinary working method for carrying out projects and exhibition programs that are based on collaborative structures and negotiation processes between different cultural agents, because I think that sort of opens up opportunities for the creation of deeper social fabrics and expanding the possibilities of knowledge exchange. So I would say that that traditional focus of thinking curating as just that contextual framework for displaying exhibitions has sort of moved or has been a little bit displaced from that traditional focus of the care and contextualization of works of art to become what different influential curators have called as that infrastructure where these relationships are interwoven and sort of cared for. So that's just context, but let's dive into the projects. This is It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's the Yes Men, which was co-curated along with John Sinonos, a really good friend of mine. So for those who don't know them, the Yes Men are an activist group who have had a long history of infiltrating meetings, conferences, and news broadcasts in order to spread awareness of critical issues on an international scale. They take on the personas of spokespeople, corporate representatives, government agents, and executives, and they have created elaborate hoaxes and interventions using what they call identity correction, culture jamming, and creative activism tactics to reveal the absurdity and lack of ethics within some of the corporate and political world, while in their projects providing glimpses of how these politicians or corporations should behave in order to help create like a truly sustainable and just world. So having both of us appreciated the Yes Men's work, humor, and activism separately, it was exciting to discover that we had our own previous interactions with their work, and we wanted to collaborate together to help showcase their projects to others. This exhibition was made when I was finishing my master's degree, and by sort of pushing the limits and driving their audiences, the Yes Men audiences, to redefine our own ethical boundaries, agencies, and allegiance, the Yes Men try to critique and reflect upon those instabilities or lack of ethics found in businesses and politics. So I had known them before from one of these events that I had mentioned, that was Global Power Shift, where hundreds of climate leaders from around the world had gathered in Istanbul to share stories, learn skills, and sharpen strategies for climate action. So we approached them with John with the proposal of this exhibition. And these are some photos of the research process. We were met with a lot of excitement, approval, of course, from the Yes Men team, and I would say an incredible amount of generosity also, as we were welcomed to their working space without hesitation or restrictions to review their archives and projects. So we faced some challenges that were very exciting. First was like cataloging, organizing, and understanding their archive. Then sort of scaling the project, understanding the scale of the project that we wanted, the time and the resources that we would need to fundraise or find with our own capacities, and also understanding the special exhibition production requirements that showcasing the movies, the documents, the objects, the photos of those actions entailed for us. After visiting, of course, their workspace and digging through years of these archival material, we drafted a checklist of works we wanted to include in the exhibition, which we sent to the Yes Men, and we included them in the decision-making process along the way. And also thinking about the background, we, as a curatorial team, developed sort of a working relationship in which we were continually open to listening to one another, as well as the artists' ideas and feedback and suggestions for the building of that exhibition. So the show presented a survey of different memorable interventions, videos, documents, and objects from the last decade, and highlighted the continual efforts of the Yes Men to spark resistance and showcase projects that demanded awareness for critical, ecological, democratic, and geopolitical issues of an international scale. In this case specifically, this is a screenshot of a project when the Yes Men faked a BBC interview live, during which a spokesperson for Dow Chemical, which was one of the representatives of the Yes Men, announced a multi-billion-dollar payment to the victims of a notorious 1985 explosion at a Union Carbide insecticide factory in Bhopal, India, that killed 8,000 people, injured many more, and has had defects to birth up to this day. After that, Dow Chemical actual representatives came out to say that that spokesperson that had appeared in BBC Live wasn't actually theirs. Dow Chemical's stock price plunged on Wall Street, and the yes men were as unmasked as the hoaxers. This other project is called the Survivable, yeah, and it made its first appearance in 2006 when Halliburton representatives, of course the yes men, attended a conference on climate change and demonstrated the functionality of the large inflatable suits, which were called a gated community for one, that would keep corporate managers safe from global warming. And people attending the meeting also thought it was true. At Climate Week of 2009, the Yes Men and some secret agents from the House of Yes launched a waterborne assault on the United Nations with a group of these survivables to, as they call it, rescue the planet from short-sighted thinking on climate change. Also, after the US Chamber of Commerce killed some important environmental regulations, over a dozen of survivables swarmed into the US Capitol to pressure the Senate to vote for strong climate legislation, and they also became sort of symbols in that project. On 2008, this is another, 2005, I think, this is another project were at a London banking conference to which they were invited because of their fake Dow website. This Dow representative unveiled an acceptable risk calculator for determining how many deaths were acceptable when achieving large profits, which of course none aren't. But the attendants applauded the lecture, in which some of these representatives pondered whether some huge industrial and environmental crimes, including the Bhopal catastrophe that I mentioned before, were golden skeletons, so meaning lucrative and acceptable skeletons in the closet. And several of the bankers in attendance signed up for licenses of that acceptable risk calculator, and even posed with the acceptable risk mascot Gilda, that is this golden skeleton, for photos. Of course, they were later on exposed as part of the performance, and the main question was sort of if market forces were all that sets limits on corporations, what behaviors would constitute acceptable risk. This is another project where they created a special edition of the New York Times that was a fake paper that was like 14 pages long, and the idea was to end the war on Iraq while it was still raging. The idea was sort of to spread a message of possibility, and was one of the Yes Men's biggest project, and a collaboration with the anti-advertising agency, as well as many other groups and individuals. This was a project that was also created and launched in the context of the Hillary and Trump elections that was happening during the exhibition. And these are some of the legal threats that were exhibited in the show. So using the characteristic humor of the Yes Men, the exhibition tried to reflect upon the Yes Men's contributions to our understanding of creative resistance, as well as the importance of cultivating a participatory culture in which we use our individual agencies to build a better world that is not only a possibility, but also hopefully like an irresistible reality. And we wanted to do the work justice by presenting several memorable interventions, videos, documents, and objects from that last decade that were still relatable and relevant to those times. The most challenging aspect of organizing the exhibition was making sure that the works that we showed and the manner in which they were presented were reflective and true to the message of the artist, and that it didn't become like a very stale or like very boring exhibition, because in their elaborate hoaxes and pranks, the Yes Men provide these fleeting glimpses of a more humane world while spreading this awareness and attention to critical issues in both national and international levels. So we also managed to make some interventions around the university at that time. The second project that I want to share with you is the 45th National Art Salon that Stephen mentioned in the beginning. For this one, we need a little bit of context of the theme of that art salon. So taking as a reference the work of José Celestino Mutis, and especially his contribution to knowledge with the botanical expedition, the University of Antioquia organized the salon, the 45th National Art Salon, under the name Mutis 2020, but it actually opened in 2021 due to the pandemic. José Celestino Mutis was a Spanish priest, botanist, geographer, mathematician, and doctor who carried out much of his research work in Santa Fe de Bogota, which is now Bogota. The botanical expedition began in 1783 and ended in 1810. And a viceroy that was called Antonio Caballero y Góngora appointed José Celestino Mutis as head of this task, which had the objective of preparing a study of the natural history of Nueva Granada, that is now the Colombian territory, amongst others, and to map the kingdom with its flora and natural resources. So the idea of the University of Antioquia was to produce an open call for the 45th National Art Salon for artists whose research creation processes focused on topics related to nature. So that would allow the university to promote or showcase practices related to botany, zoology, ecology, taxonomy, permaculture, sustainable development, biodiversity, as well as cultural and natural heritage from a contemporary critical perspective. So the 7 finalist projects that were selected out of the 115 proposals that were received through the open call within the framework of the National Culture Awards of the University of Antioquia presented a take on José Celestino Mutis' work, but were related in different senses, in the mix of different cultural environments or disciplinary fields that the artists used, in their inter or transdisciplinary methods and profiles, in their ways of addressing the complexity of relationships between human species and non-human species, as well as our natural environments and context. So the 7 finalists would receive a grant to produce their own projects, and they would present them as individual exhibitions that would compete for the first prize of the National Art Salon. And these 7 projects were showcased at the MUA, that is the Museo Universitario de la Universidad de Antioquia, the museum of that university. And so I was invited to facilitate and support the development of those 7 exhibitions that were competing for that project. So I'll share with you some photos of the project. These are, the first one is by Waira Wawa. That's the artistic name of Benjamin Hakanamihoy Tisoy. And the project is called In Search of the Flower of the Womb. This project is created under the ideology of the Inga people of thinking beautiful and of well-living, of recovering and valuing their own history. Waira Wawa is part of the Inca people and based on the narration of the spirit of the principle of knowledge, with which metaphorically speaking describes the origin of life and thought of the Inca people in the Siundoy Valley in Colombia. It describes also the cultural, social, economic, political, and environmental terms, how they relate to the territory. So the artist created a series of images that you're seeing that account for the valuable cultural systems that protects the gardens or orchards of knowledge created by older women in said territory, and combining language, classification systems, use practice, social interactions, rituals, and spirituality. The project arose from that. Arose from a community research exercise that was focused in knowledge about plants grown in these gardens. And by using digital experimentation processes, the artist created these geometric compositions full of symbols that represent the times that exist in the memory of each of these plants, minerals, animals, and human beings that coexist in these single territories. So the images presented a journey through the interwoven paths of flora, fauna, characters, places, and colors that traverse the history of the people of the Yahe culture, celebrating the place of life and thought that was assigned to each of these beings. One thing that I find very important is that these unique knowledge systems are not only key elements for cultural diversity, but can also be understood as the basis for sustainable development adapted to actual local ways of life. This is a project developed by Edwin Monsalve called Landscape Drifts, or Derivas del Paisaje. And through his career, Edwin has developed a series of projects that have as their main reference point the botanical expedition that we were talking about that was led by Mutis, and the different expeditions led by Alexander von Humboldt on the American continent between 1799 and 1804 or 1805. And from a critical perspective, the artist contrasted the renowned exploration trips and scientific studies of these naturalists with the transformation of cartography and territory. And so he proposed like timely reflections, I would think, on the influence of human beings on the environment, and focused on the exploitation, appropriation, and pollution of natural resources. So what you're seeing in the back is a series of two-dimensional pieces made of paper that rested on the walls of the room, creating an abstract landscape and a horizon line that was created in oil and mineral coal. And on the other side of the room, what we're seeing in the first part of the photo is this sculptural piece on paper that recreated a topography within which rivers and lakes were drawn in mercury that were resting over the paper. So that synthesis of forms, the use of color, and the abstractions created from plant and mineral materials proposed statements about the transformation of that natural, social, ecological, and political territory of the contemporary landscape, and also sort of delved into the increased vulnerability of the communities and beings that inhabit them. And in the context of the climate crisis, I would say, and in the face of the urgency of facing these global ecological challenges, the artist assumed that drift, the landscape drift, as a process of involution and as a starting point to give substance to observations about their present and their future. This is another project by Ana Maria Espejo called Methods, Explorations, and Excuses to Approach an Unfinished Landscape. It presented a selection of different research and creation processes that Ana Maria has been developing since 2018 around the observation of nature and the territory, the experimentation with archival material, and the analysis of the landscape as a frame of reference through multiple media. And the projects reflected a critical and I would say pertinent perspective on the implications of registering, ordering, classifying, and codifying the natural world by pointing out how these human actions have not uniquely responded to the curiosity of our species, but have also been conditioned by aesthetic, utilitarian, political, and rational tensions that tend to the domination of others and territories. And so more broadly, each of her projects invited us to take a look into or to reflect on her creative processes by making visible the artist's intention to work with the strategies that tended towards a study of the landscape that refused utility and instead sought ambiguity, randomness, and were like indeterminate. And through the staging of all of these methods, explorations, and creative excuses of the selection of projects, she opened up possibilities to question the control methods through which we operate, both individually and as a collective, and also invited us to think of the construction of knowledge and the care of others and ourselves by recognizing that constant possibility of transformation that is part of all of her projects. This was another project by Nadine Ospina titled The Preponderance of the Small. And he created a multimedia installation that was made of sculptural elements, videos, and sounds that were proposed as a device for reflection on the relationships between the human beings or the human species and the natural environment. The installation pointed out the importance of multiple living beings that, although may have or are commonly ignored due to their physical dimension because they're very tiny, are fundamental for the survival and stability of different ecosystems. And in the center of a room, he had a series of videos based on the sheets of the botanical expedition of the New Kingdom of Granada. These are projects by Mónica Naranjo, De la Piedra a la Cueva, From the Stone to the Cave. Mónica Naranjo's work is based on her interest in the intimate experience on territory and its representation. In the recent years, she has focused on geology, looking into ways to understand different territories from their physical condition through processes that make use of direct experience in her travels, and interdisciplinary field work, working with scientific bibliographic reviews and conversation with experts or inhabitants of the places that she researches. And by bringing different ways of thinking and knowing and mixing geological stories with the human gaze to understand this natural environment, this project presented her research and creation processes focused on the mineral world. And so she had multiple media like drawings, videos, photography, ceramics, graphics, visual narrations, installations. And through all of that work, she examined geology through a sensitive understanding, where she assumed scientific and artistic thought as sophisticated expressions of nature's creativity. And through that, she explored poetic ways of staging fictions that she has found in the scientific language. And last but not least, this is the project of Nicolás Bonilla Maldonado, titled Elementary Particles, Rock Inventory of the Apex Geological Service. I would say that for more than 15 years, Nicolás Bonilla has been dedicated to ceramics, exploring the possibilities of this material beyond its traditional utilitarian character. And for the last 7 years, this work has focused on elementary particles, rock inventory for the Apex Geological Service. That is a contemporary art project that, using ceramic traditional techniques, questions the relationship between art and science. This fictitious institution, that is the Geological Service, and that rock inventory, emulates a contemporary expedition in the style of the Royal Botanic Expedition or the Chorographic Commission, and today includes nearly 50,000 ceramic rocks that were made by hand by him, with different construction techniques and finishes that have been subjected to a very rigorous taxonomic classification created by the artist. So the exhibition created meeting points between the subjectivity of fine art creation and scientific curiosity, and also examine the creative possibilities of interdisciplinary work. From a post-colonial studies perspective, one would say that the project also called into question the power of control, domination, and appropriation of nature by scientific establishments in the processes of collection, classification, giving different hierarchies, and disseminating natural specimens. And so the project also ended up questioning the power of museological devices, forms of mediation, and languages that are usually associated with exhibition, scientific, and knowledge production spaces, while revealing an important exercise in material memory. Because what would take 10,000 years to be produced by regular soil or vegetation caused by climate and erosion were reversed by the artist in 10 hours using the ceramic oven, showcasing the different possibilities of transformation of clay and exploring in depth the particularities of ceramic work. And one last one is this project by Alberto Baraya that is titled Bogotá's Flora, Felipe Juan Expedition. So you probably know Alberto Baraya, but for those who don't, for more than 2 decades, he has worked on the Artificial Plant Herbarium, which is a contemporary project that studies reproduction of plant nature in the style of the 18th century scientific expeditions, but it questions the scientific paradigm and the objectivity of its methods by displacing and sort of creating a parody of the traditional figure of the botanical expeditionary, and criticizing post-colonial societies while proposing reflections on our aesthetic behaviors. The project, what you're seeing, is a wide collection of artificial plants made of plastic, fabric, paper, glass, wire, which have been collected over several years in botanical sheets, photographs, maps, and accessories that are part of different urban expeditions and rural studies that he has on these sort of plastic or non-natural flora. And so taking the structures and methodologies of social and natural sciences, the artist creates these classification categories that follow sort of the spirit of Jorge Luis Borges' Chinese encyclopedia. And it presents absurd taxonomies and ironic comments on contemporary societies and why we collect these sort of flora. And so this project specifically dealt with the San Felipe and Juan 23 neighborhoods in Bogota, where in 2019 the artist led these exchange sessions with the collaboration of the neighbors of that neighborhoods, and introduced different and new artificial species into that local flora. The species and the pieces were also part of the exhibition, were found in the homes and the commercial venues of those neighborhoods during the collecting trips, and were generously donated by the neighbors. And the last project that I wanted to share with you, just to finish up our examples, are these projects of traces of disappearance. It was an exhibition that was the result of a collaboration between the Colombian Truth Commission, as Stephen was mentioning before, Forensic Architecture, and the art museums of the Central Bank of Colombia, that is the Banco de la República. This alliance is unique in the international arena, and it's a pioneer in the history of truth commissions, because it is the first exhibition that articulates the clarification of human rights violations with spatial and technological investigation methodologies that generate artistic results that have been shown in museums, but that are part of a research study of the Truth Commission, in this case, the Colombian Truth Commission. the Banco de la República and our museums joined that team to produce the exhibition and to bring it to the communities and the audiences that we serve in Bogota, to promote dialogues, readings, and interpretations about it, as well as to create a meeting point with another program that we have in the museum that is called the Peace Speaks Up, or La Paz se toma la palabra. So the show in general focused on 3 cases. I'm just going to show you 2. The first one was about the dispossession of lands in the banana region of Urabá, the forced disappearance after the seizure and retaking of the Palace of Justice in Colombia was the second one. We're not going to talk about that one right now. And the third one was about the violence that has historically affected indigenous peoples and territories of the Amazon basin, which I'm going to go over a little bit. So the exhibition featured the results of a broad community of practices that collaborated and recognized the diversity of knowledge, including a network of farmers, campesinos, activists, lawyers, historians, scientists, geographers, designers, journalists, educators, students, artists, curators, and architects. And the production of the show involved open source research, digital and physical model building, 3D animations, data analysis, and virtual reality environments. The show proposed, I would say, some major reflections on the role of art and culture in the articulation of collective stories, on how visual investigation methodologies contribute to the clarification of human and environmental rights violations, and reflected on the reality of a country that is going through an important process of understanding its history and its present in the context of the Colombian peace process. And so in this investigation, specifically, violence against people and violence against the land were intertwined to reveal in the traces of disappeared territories. The Urabá region of Antioquia is known for the political violence that has been experienced in the area since the 1980s, which is a shame that is why it's mostly known. But since then, massacres and paramilitary groups have expelled thousands of campesinos who have been forced to abandon their homes and their agricultural lands. And also, as that happened, the landscape in which thousands of these rural communities have been forcibly displaced has been completely transformed, to the point that villages have been completely erased, and that diverse vegetation that was used to cover the land was replaced by a sea of banana trees, and the destruction of the mangrove swamps along the coast produced massive erosion, which is why part of the trails and locations where these massacres occurred in the past are now underwater. So the transformation of the landscape is related to a wide network of actors, amongst which are the paramilitary, the military forces, large landowners, local and transnational companies, banks and state institutions, and Forensic and the Truth Commission focused on that relational notion of dispossession. And the study was a framework of that physical environmental violence, as well as various notions of property and legal and institutional practices that have been established in that territory. The research included 2 perspectives. The first one was the issue and the disputes over the concentration and distribution of the land, so that delved into the agrarian issue in Colombia. And the second one studied the environment as an agent in war and not just a passive object in dispute. And so in order to create that project, there was a methodology that was created for this process that were called situated testimonies. This technique that was developed by Forensic is based on a collaborative exercise in which interviewees are able to walk metaphorically and digitally speaking in these 3D environments where they reconstructed the dispossessed lands with the campesinos or the people that are at risk of dispossession. So these are some installation views of the project that was at the MAMU. And the second project was developed around the Nucac territory in the Colombian Amazon. These it's very interesting because the oldest images of the Nucac territory are from 1987, which is rather it's not old at all, and only capture a small portion of this extension. And so it was a very interesting project because it was only at the beginning of the 1990s that the panorama changed and the Nucac people were forced to leave their voluntary isolation, and the state recognized the territory of the Guaviare where the Nucac people live, admitting the existence of a people that until then had been evaded. So what we see in this project is a mural that showcases the different ways in which the Nucac people have been affected by violence, by armed conflict between military and paramilitary forces, but also the result of formal and illicit economies that include both coca cultivation and its destruction through fumigation with toxic substances from the air, and in addition, different sorts of environmental issues like the livestock that has been placed in their lands and the deforestation practices in this environment. So the project shows how the conflict has forced the Nucac people out of their territory to the border where these dynamics converge. And in the mural, the jungle or the Amazon territory became an archival record of a story of disappearance that is happening today. These are some of the photographs of the different installation views of that specific project. And these are some photos of the educational space that we created to accompany the exhibition and to have people create some spaces to exchange knowledge, to share their emotions, and to also bring some awareness and invite to produce action after seeing the exhibition. This is a photo of the catalog, which had a lot of first times for the museum. It was the first time that we had a text that was a polyphonic dialogue that contextualizes the exhibition, and also a text that was written by the educations team of the museum, as well, of course, as the researchers and curators of the show. So this is what I wanted to share with you briefly about these different projects and how they relate and the behind the scenes of each of these exhibitions.
Great, thank you so much. So there is, at this point, just one question. Fantastic, the Salon exhibition. I love the museological critique and some of the projects. Who won the competition?
Nicolas Bonilla won the prize. That's the project of the sort of 50,000 rocks that were made by hand that sort of resembled a natural history museum. That was the one that won.
Does anyone else have, I have many comments and questions, but does anyone in the audience have anything else to ask at this point? So I'm going to ask something, and maybe we'll, okay, let's, Thanks. This was marvelous. Okay. Yes, it was marvelous. Um, so just one question quickly, which seems, very central to what you do as a curator, which is to say, I'm almost surprised, in fact, since you're working with a bank, with a national institution, how activist the program is. And in the readings that Laura had sent me for the students, there was discussion about reaching out into communities through the bank as a kind of new formatting of the idea of curatorial intervention. And
Mhm.
I'm just wondering, just in the most, what should I say, empirical way, um, in that curatorial role as an activist curator, what effects did you see or have you seen on the communities into which you've entered?
Yeah, the project that I think you're referring is this one, the um, regional image guardian territories.
Right.
Um, this project was developed in the midst of the pandemic. So when the exhibition spaces were closed and we had programmed 7 regional exhibitions to take place throughout the country that showcased the production of different artists throughout Colombia through an open call as well. There was no way of showcasing their work in our white cube spaces, right? So we started thinking of ways into decentralizing the exhibition spaces and moving to the communities and spaces where the artists live. And taking as a reference the Duet exhibition by Hans Ulrich, which we probably all know, we invited the artists to create different interventions in these permeable spaces that were, in a way, private because there were parts of their home, but also public in the sense that the communities and neighbors could see them. So the artists started creating interventions in their windows, in their ceilings, in their gardens, etc., and invited their communities to be a part of these creative practices. So the work of the curators also was sort of displaced. That idea of contextualizing the finished artworks into a white cube space changed, and the idea was to facilitate the exchanges between different artists, because the artists created their pieces and made some instructions that were then sent to another artist in another part of Colombia to recreate, or to not recreate but interpret that those instructions as well. So in very meaningful and real life experiences, it changed the way that we were living through the pandemic, because we were very, here in Colombia, the time that we were had to stay at home was very long, very, very prolonged, and that actually created a community of support for the artists, for the neighbors, and for the curators as well. And I must say that maybe this is not like the sexiest thing to talk about, but we were able to move the budget of the production of the 7 exhibitions to create grants, or I don't know if these like bursaries, more like bursaries that were given to each of the artists to produce these new works. And even in a time where there were no other like income entries, that was very much I would say maybe not celebrated, but like welcomed from the artist's point of view.
And was there some sense of how it affected those artist communities themselves?
Yes, there was actually. Oh, I wished I had some of the. Let me see if I can show you some images because I do have some which I can share with you briefly. I think they're in Spanish, but they're mostly images, so I think it's fine. But some of the interventions had a lot of like political messages around the needs of the communities themselves, um, very, very presently. And so some of the artworks that were made, for example, I can't find it right now, in large fabrics with political messages like the lives of Black and Indigenous people matter, that were made in Cali, were later on taken into the streets to be part of civil interventions in the streets, and were later on showcased in different places of of the country, because we're talking about the middle of the pandemic, where there were a lot of demonstrations in the street, and so different projects also were related to those sort of practices and very political, I would say, messages.
Okay. So we are a little bit over time, and I see that one of our students, Abbas, has a question. Abbas, I'm going to ask that since we're a little over time, that we'll move that question to the session with the students. So I want to thank Laura for the public presentation, and note that come back next week. Stephanie Hessler, the curator and director of Swiss Institute in New York, will be our guest then. And Laura, so we will see you with the students shortly. Thanks again. Thanks to
Thank you
everyone.
very much, Stephen, and thank you everyone for joining.